One Saturday morning in Atlanta, armed officers stormed into Marcus Johnson's home and forced his family out at gunpoint, claiming a foreclosure that didn't exist. Their cold commands and public humiliation turned a quiet neighborhood into a stage of injustice. But Marcus wasn't just another man. He was a federal prosecutor with the law itself in his hands. And only wait until you hear the shocking turn that flipped this nightmare on its head, and how justice, in the end, came roaring back. Atlanta, Saturday morning. The Johnson family sat at the table, sunlight spilling through the blinds, the smell of pancakes still in the air. Marcus Johnson, husband, father of two, was pouring orange juice for his daughter when it began. A thunderous pounding on the front door, fists, heavy and relentless, shaking the frame. Before Marcus could even rise from his chair, the door burst open. Officers in tactical gear stormed inside, rifles pointed. Voices filled the room, sharp, commanding, chaotic. "Everybody down! Out of the house, now!" The children screamed. Danielle, his wife, pulled them close, wrapping her arms around their trembling shoulders. The bright morning suddenly felt like a nightmare. Marcus froze, his heart hammering. He lifted his hands instinctively, disbelief written across his face. This had to be a mistake. He had paid every mortgage bill, every property tax. Their home was theirs, secure, lawful, unquestionable. But the shouting continued, the words cut like glass. "Court-ordered foreclosure. You need to vacate immediately." Marcus's mind reeled. Foreclosure? Impossible. Every record, every receipt said otherwise. This wasn't an eviction. This wasn't enforcement. This was a violation. His family's dignity, their rights, stripped away in seconds. And then he saw it. Two rifles, steady, pointed inches away from his children. Their wide eyes glistened with fear, their small bodies pressed against their mother for safety. Something primal surged inside Marcus. Anger burned through the disbelief, through the shock. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was rage. And for anyone watching, the first reaction was the same. How could this happen here? How could this happen in America, in broad daylight, to an innocent family in their own home? The officers pushed the family out onto the front lawn, the morning sun suddenly harsh, almost blinding. The pavement was still cool from the night, but rough beneath their bare feet. Danielle stumbled, her arms wrapped tightly around the children, pressing them close to her chest, as if she could shield them from the eyes staring, the cameras filming, the rifles still aimed. The street was no longer silent. Neighbors had poured out of their homes. Some stood at a distance, arms crossed, faces unreadable. Others whispered in hushed tones, their words carried by the breeze. A few lifted their phones, recording, each second immortalized in digital memory. "Looks like they finally lost the house," a man murmured, not even lowering his voice. A woman on the porch next door shook her head. "I knew something was off. People like that." Her sentence trailed, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Every whisper was a knife. Danielle felt each one. Her cheeks burned, not from the sun, but from the weight of humiliation. This wasn't just an eviction, this was a public shaming. Their private life, their reputation, their dignity ripped open for the entire street to watch, like a spectacle. Her voice cracked, trembling, as she begged. "Please, my son's inhaler is inside. He can't breathe without it. Just let me grab it, please." The officer in front of her didn't flinch. His eyes were hidden behind dark glasses, but his voice was sharp, practiced, detached. "Step back, ma'am. Do not move." The words hit harder than any physical shove. Danielle froze, torn between desperation for her child and the fear of making one wrong move. Her son clung to her side, chest heaving, not from illness this time, but from sobs that shook his small frame. His sister pressed her face into Danielle's shirt, trying to disappear. Behind them, the sirens still blared, though there was no need. Their flashing red and blue lights painted the entire block like a crime scene. The sound of children crying mixed with the mechanical wail, a soundtrack of pain and chaos that neighbors would replay in their minds, and in their videos, again and again. Marcus stood a few feet away, separated from his family, forced to keep his hands visible. His jaw clenched, his chest heavy, his pulse hammering in his ears. But it wasn't fear that gripped him, it was something far worse. It was the pain of helplessness. The pain of watching his wife beg for mercy and be denied. The pain of hearing his children sob while strangers judge them. The pain of realizing that in that moment, he was not Marcus Johnson the father, the provider, the protector. Not Marcus Johnson the professional who had spent years serving justice. To the men in uniform, he wasn't even Marcus Johnson the homeowner. He was invisible, reduced. Just another black man whose family could be dragged onto the lawn and treated like trespassers in their own home. And that realization carved deeper than any insult could. For the viewers, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't just about a house. This was about dignity stripped away, a family humiliated in broad daylight, with an entire community watching in silence. Marcus stood motionless, his family only steps away, yet feeling a world apart. His mind was racing, not with panic, but with precision. Years in the courtroom had trained him to think clearly under pressure. He knew one thing: words, when chosen correctly, carried more power than weapons. But first, he needed proof of who he was, proof that could turn this chaos around. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus lowered his right hand toward his pocket. His movements were measured, every inch intentional. He could feel the tension in the air tighten like a drawn bowstring. "Don't move," an officer barked, his voice sharp as the barrel of his rifle pressed against Marcus's temple. Gasps rippled from the watching crowd. The neighbors filming held their breath, their cameras catching every second. Marcus's heart pounded, not with fear, but with resolve. His voice, steady and firm, cut through the noise. "You are making the biggest mistake of your careers." The words hung heavy in the air. He pulled his wallet free, opened it with precision, and revealed the badge he carried everywhere, the one that symbolized his years of service to the law. A golden seal, bold lettering, authority impossible to deny. Department of Justice, Assistant United States Attorney Marcus Johnson. For a moment, time froze. The officer staring at the badge blinked, his posture stiffening. Another leaned closer, squinting at the emblem, and then drew back as if struck by lightning. His eyes widened in disbelief. The silence on the street was deafening. Even the children's sobs quieted, replaced by a stunned hush that spread from porch to porch. The neighbors who had whispered only moments ago now gasped, their phones still raised, but their expressions shifting from judgment to shock. Because this wasn't just any man standing with his hands raised. This was a federal prosecutor, a man who had spent a decade putting criminals behind bars, men some of these very officers had arrested, a man who knew the law better than anyone else on that street. And in that single revelation, the balance of power began to tilt. The rifles no longer looked like symbols of control. They looked like evidence of an error too large to hide. Hope surged, not just in Marcus's chest, but in the eyes of his wife, his children, and even the strangers watching from across the street. The story was no longer about a family cornered. It was about a system about to be exposed. Marcus no longer looked like the man cornered on his own lawn. He stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes blazing with the authority of both a father and a prosecutor. His voice cut through the silence of the block, steady and commanding. "You stormed into my home, you terrified my children, and you did it without a valid warrant, without a shred of lawful cause. This foreclosure doesn't exist, and I know the judge on this circuit personally. Every single one of you will answer for this." The words fell like a gavel strike. The officers shifted uneasily, the barrels of their rifles dipping, then lowering completely. The authority they had clung to just moments before dissolved into hesitation. One officer stammered, searching for words. Another stepped back, avoiding Marcus's gaze. Their control over the scene had slipped away entirely. But it was too late to erase what had been done. Phones were still raised, recording every second. The neighbors who had once whispered now stood silent, stunned by the truth unraveling before them. A story that began with humiliation had transformed into something far larger, a reckoning unfolding in real time. Within hours, the videos spread beyond the block, shared across feeds, news outlets, and community forums. The image of a family forced onto their lawn at gunpoint, followed by the reveal of Marcus's badge, ignited outrage. Across the country, viewers asked the same question. If this could happen to a federal prosecutor, what happens to families without such protection? Days later, the police department issued a formal apology. The officers involved were suspended, pending investigation. Their faces, once hidden behind authority, were now tied to accountability. But Marcus knew the true victory wasn't the apology. It was the platform. Standing before microphones, cameras flashing, he spoke not just as a prosecutor, but as a father, a husband, a man who had seen his family stripped of dignity. "This isn't about me," he said, voice steady but heavy with meaning. "This is about every family who doesn't have the shield of a federal badge, every parent who doesn't have the means to fight back. What happened on my lawn happens too often in silence, and that silence ends now." The audience watching his words couldn't help but feel the weight of them. This wasn't just justice for one family. This was a call to action. And so, what began as humiliation ended as inspiration. A moment of powerlessness had been transformed into a symbol of resolve, a reminder that the fight for justice isn't won in silence, but in standing tall, even when the world tries to bring you to your knees.